在 MBB 做咨询是什么感觉？做战略咨询的都是一群什么妖魔鬼怪？如果你想要了解关于咨询的内幕，那么欢迎回到我的频道。今天这期视频给大家带来的是我与两个在 MBB 做咨询的朋友的 Q&A 问答环节。好了，废话不多说，我们直接进入正题。大家好，这里是 Adam。
Hi Adam。
Hi Adam。
今天非常有幸的请来了我两位好朋友，之前也是去 Kiss IT 的队友 Laura 和 David 来跟我们聊一聊咨询这个行业。
Hi guys, I'm David. I was born in China, in Nanjing, and then I came to Toronto when I was 3 years old, and I've been growing up in Canada ever since. I'm in 4th year commerce with Adam at Queen's, and I work in management consulting.
My name is Laura. I moved to Canada when I was 8 months old. I don't really remember any of it, and quite frankly, all this Mandarin that Adam just said, I have no idea what he just said. But I also am in my 4th year of Queen's Commerce, and I also did a summer in management consulting.
I came into business school wanting to do banking, as I think most people who go into business school do. I wanted to do investment banking at Goldman Sachs. That was kind of my dream job. But I think what I realized as I learned more about finance and investment banking in general is that there was a cultural incompatibility. Especially for people of our cultural background, it's very, very different when you look into finance, what that world actually is like. It's a lot more fratty, a lot more high intensity. And so once you got to know that culture, for me, I realized that it wasn't something that I identified with. And then the next closest option was consulting. A lot of the work that you do in consulting is very similar to banking, but I think there's a much more wide variety in the background of people in the industry. And that to me was more attractive than the culture of finance.
Yeah, I think for me, I never really considered any other industries. I think mostly I chose consulting because I knew I had to be in an environment where I was like surrounded by people 24/7. That's just kind of how my personality is created. So I think consulting was a perfect way to have that aspect of your professional life be integrated with like cool projects and things that you'd be interested in.
First of all, I think it's obviously an immensely valuable privilege to have in terms of an opportunity. We're very grateful. But I also think it's wise to temper expectations about any type of job. At the end of the day, MBB or any other type of job that is commonly perceived to be prestigious is still a job. It's a very good job, but it might not live up to the expectations of anybody's dream job. With that said, I think I had a very good experience my summer. The colleagues that you work with in MBB are very, very intelligent. That's the part that is definitely true. You do work on problems that, from a big picture perspective are quite impactful. I was very lucky to be on projects where the big picture of what we were doing, I could really see making a change in whatever client we were at. The more tactical things on a day-to-day basis, whether it's waking up at 4:30 a.m. on a Monday to travel, things like that, those are the parts that are significantly less interesting that a lot of people don't have visibility into. For example, they might see travel as very glamorous. I traveled my entire summer every single week, and I can tell you that it gets old really, really quickly, and hotel rooms get very, very lonely. Those aspects of the job definitely do exist, but the learning opportunity, I think, is definitely present. You learn a lot in a very short amount of time. Our summer was about 10 weeks, and in that amount of time, we were able to get familiar enough to at least accomplish a job at the very core and base level, and develop some pretty good relationships with clients since we were basically on the site with them at the entire time. And so at the end of the day, I think it definitely is a trade-off between all of these valuable benefits you get from an opportunity like working in MBB with the downside of things like, the common criticisms of the industry being your work-life balance is pretty awful. It can be isolating at times, and on a day-to-day basis, the work you do can be seen as a little bit grindy, but overall the big picture is so present. And I think it's enough of a net positive to keep somebody in the job. So I think if you've seen, Wolf of Wall Street, the movie, it's obviously an exaggeration, but there is some semblance of truth there. In finance, people are a lot more open of their objective being solely on making money. And obviously, I think that's okay if that's your goal, but the culture really is crafted around that. And as a result, you have a far more masculine, aggressive culture, a lot more toxic in some ways, but obviously a lot more straightforward, which I think some people can really appreciate. In consulting, the emphasis is a bit more on making money is far more taboo in that industry.
Okay.
People are more focused on creating business value. Whether they're serious about that or not is a different question. But in general, I think there's a more intellectual focus in consulting versus in finance, where the intention in finance, I think, is a bit more clear. In consulting, obviously, a lot of people still have the same intention, but they disguise it a bit more. That's an interesting question because it has to do with the future of consulting. In the past, a lot of the firms in MDB, they would craft the strategy, they would drop off the slide deck, and they would just leave, right? And at that point, it's the client's responsibility to take the advice or not take the advice. From the consultant's perspective, it didn't matter. These days, as consulting firms get larger and they try to get more business, they're moving in towards the business of implementation. So what that means is after the deck has been dropped off, a lot of the times you see that the consultants are sticking around to help the clients actually implement the strategy. So whereas beforehand, the clients say, here's my advice, take it or leave it. Now it's, here's my advice and let me hold your hand as we go through the steps of implementing that project. And implementation is something that can take a very long time. So that's when you expect to see much longer client relationships. And the nature of the work also starts to shift a little bit because it goes from solving strategic problems to, understanding what are the operational issues that you have to iron out in order to see a strategy through to completion. So consultants in general are starting to stay a lot longer at client sites compared to a lot of consulting firms will do at-risk fees. So what that means is compared to a regular flat rate, let's say, if I'm a consulting firm and I charge you $1 million, an at-risk structure would say, I'm going to do this project for you and you're going to pay me $100,000 up front. However, at the end of my project, you're going to give me 20% of all of your cost savings that I've created for you. In this way, theoretically, you align incentives because, if the client is able to save $1 million in costs, then you have $200,000. But as that cost savings scales, you make more money as well. So technically, it's a win-win. That creates some issues though because it causes consultants to be very short-term focused because the timeline of costs are often realized over many years for true business change. Consultants want to be paid early, obviously. And so they're very focused on making cost cuts that might, reduce costs in the short term at the harm of the business in the long term. And that's been one of the criticisms of the at-risk structure. So nowadays, I think they try to balance both to align incentives, but the better answer is probably that consulting firms also always have an interest in preserving client relationships. So if you deliver poor work, right, the client might feel like they've been cheated or burned, and that just means that they won't hire you back in the long term. Whereas if you're a partner at a consulting firm, the value for you comes from holding on to this client for many, many years. And so you have a natural incentive to do good work and maybe even give them a favorable price if it means that over the course of a long time, that relationship is stronger.
I think the most pressure I felt was from myself and the rate at which you were but you should be learning. You want to be effective as a member of the team as quickly as possible, and you don't want to make the same mistake twice. So I think that was where most of the pressure came out. It was pretty personal.
Yeah, I think what Laura said is very true. A lot of people who work in consulting are of the insecure overachiever archetype, which is to say, people who do well in school but always wonder whether they can be doing better or what things they should be accomplishing to prove, their worth. And in a consulting firm, when your clients are paying you very big fees to, achieve an end product, there's a lot of pressure on the team as well as yourself as a member of that team to, like Laura said, learn quickly and minimize the amount of mistakes that you make. At the end of the day, it's almost like you want to preserve your own face, right? You don't want to do again. There's the actual punishments for doing poorly aren't actually that serious, but it's more of your ability to be proud of your own work and feel confident in what you're doing that I think drives a lot of pressure. So a lot of the times, your manager will tell you, don't stay up, don't stay super late to do this. Whereas in other industries, they might expect you to stay late. In consulting, there's a general narrative that, work-life balance is very important. If you ever feel like you have poor work-life balance, you should tell us and we'll fix it, we'll adjust the work streams. But the pressure comes from, like Laura said, the person themselves to accomplish what they were tasked with doing within a certain set amount of time. So if my manager expects something tomorrow morning and I feel like I need to stay up late because I'm not learning as fast to do it, or because I'm not as effective at doing it, then I will end up staying up, even if my manager I know will tell me, don't do that, just stay late until tomorrow.
So if you're asking about what the KPI in consulting is, similar to what would be applied in capital markets, I think it's ultimately going to be client impact, whatever that means. It's way less of a quantitative measure. It's not just a fraction, but when you're going throughout a project, you're seeing how much can I lift your revenue, how much can I reduce your costs. And so all this bubbles up into client impact, whether that be quantitative or just like, you know, soulless in one, like a manager's confidence in a decision or something like that. But that's ultimately what I think a project will be measured into.
So in terms of like pressure as well, a very practical one is just time. A lot of the times there will be a set time when the project ends, or a set time when you have a meeting with the CEO or a steering committee. And if you don't have your deck done by that point, then you're going to show up to a meeting with, you know, you're going to look embarrassing, right, in front of the CEO. So the ultimate metric is client impact, but the short-term metric for people working on a team is definitely, there's a meeting on Friday, and if this isn't done by Friday, we're going to look like clowns. So that's where a lot of the external pressure comes from.
Hard for me to say because I still don't know like a long-term fit in consulting, but I think past like the things on paper, like your GPA or where your school is from, that sort of thing, I think the people who I've seen have been successful in consulting are those who like not only have people skills, but are genuinely motivated by building positive relationships. Like the people who are very successful, you know, feel a special onus to their clients, feel like they have a special ability to connect with people even like who might not have their tenure, those sorts of things. So it's not necessarily an extroversion, but I think it's like a motivation from like a source of relationships. I think that makes you a memorable consultant to your clients.
I think strongly related to what Laura said, to me, one of the most important things to have is emotional intelligence. Because a lot of consulting, people see it as analytical, logical, looking at spreadsheets and coming up with data, but a huge half of it really that is less emphasized is just maintaining good client relationships. So in my summer, you know, I was working very closely with clients, and some of them had trouble working on what we were doing. Some of them were a bit emotionally distressed that what we were doing, things like that. And your ability to basically have some empathy for them and to speak in a way that, you know, gives them confidence in their own abilities and stuff, to therefore have more faith in the project, I think is understated, where it's not just the analytical and logical, you know, spreadsheet modeling skills that you have, but also your ability, like Laura said, to just actually connect with their client and help them succeed as, you know, an employee within their organization. That I think is also very, very important.